Welcome back to the channel. If you're here from part 1, hello, welcome. If you're not here from part 1, we talked about learned helplessness as a model for depression, so maybe a card somewhere linking to that if you're curious. If not, here we are. In this video, I'm going to talk about a real life example, I think, illustrating how learned helplessness can kind of explain some aspects of some depression experiences. So certainly it's not comprehensive over all of the mood disorders and all the things people go through, but it kind of fits in this one case. I just want to note that one of my goals with this channel is to raise awareness and open discussion and conversation about mental health and sort of the downsides of having a psychological disorder, and also destigmatize it a little bit and make it more part of the conversation that we have as a society. And one of, I think, the best ways to do that is to share stories that we go through, and I'm able to do so and have a platform to do it, so here we are. If you're new to the channel, a little bit about me. I have bipolar, generalized anxiety disorder, OCD, and some other yada yada. The important part is the bipolar for this video. And, I've had this basically since I was a teen, if not before then. They don't really like diagnosing kids with this stuff, but yeah. It's something I've dealt with a good chunk of my life. So at this point, as a lady in my mid-30s, I've developed some coping strategies. I know what my emotional triggers are when I'm not getting enough sleep, too much sleep, that's a warning sign that things are kind of trending one way and I need to start doing things to try to not go too far. And yeah, so kind of got things under control. So if it wasn't completely obvious, this video is going to be about me. And it's basically the story of my last year at grad school and the basic shitstorm hellscape that it ended up being, quite frankly. The people involved in the story, to start with, there's me. Hi. I was a 6th year grad student, which was a little long for our program, but like my husband in physics, I was normal. Married, happily. And yeah, very eager to finish. Then we have Richard. Richard was my advisor. He was relatively new faculty when I started. He had just gotten his first promotion and tenure bump before I started, which I thought, cool, that means he won't get canned. Like what happened to a friend of mine, his advisor. His first grad student just graduated right before I started. Like I met him when I was visiting the campus. His second grad student was a year or two ahead of me, and I was entering the same time as another grad student in his lab. So we were technically sort of his 3rd and 4th grad students. So in the grand scheme of things, relatively new to the whole advising experience. Another person that will come up a lot in this story is Lily. Lily is my best friend, and I met her in grad school. And important points for her in the story is she was also a 6th year grad student. So we were sort of the 2 lone survivors at that point of our cohort. And she was also getting married at the end of the year. And that date will sort of become relevant when it gets there. Another person to introduce is Doug. Doug was a couple years behind me in grad school, but he was also advised by Richard. Moving out a little bit, we have other people in the same program. There's Sandra. Sandra was a committee member for me on my dissertation and master's, and someone who I deeply respect both as a person and as a researcher. She does amazing stuff. Her research was always super interesting to me. I really valued her opinion on what I was doing, the field, all of it. Sandra was also co-advising Richard's other student, Connor, and yeah. Al is somebody else who was on my dissertation committee He started as a faculty member the year after I started grad school. I ended up attending Al's lab meetings because, one, he was really fun and charismatic. Two, he was an expert on a technique that I found really interesting and ended up applying to my own research area, which was something that hadn't really been done before. And so brought him onto my dissertation committee to help with that process, because really this technique was his bread and butter and I wanted to do it right. Another faculty member in my program was Kevin. He started as faculty the same year as Al did, and my 6th year of grad school, he was the program coordinator. So the program coordinator, if you aren't familiar with the jargon, is somebody who basically oversees the program. They try to make sure that the paperwork is up to date, they make sure the requirements are still valid and good, and are supposed to intercede in places where there's tension between the student and advisor. So there was my program, and then there was sort of like a sister or neighboring program. We had a lot of overlap between the two of us in classes and research interests and stuff. We interacted with these guys a lot compared to some of the other programs at the school. First person of note from this other program is Kendra. I helped Kendra with a driving simulator project because she needed somebody who knew how to do it. And after that, developed a pretty friendly working relationship with her. Periodically, we'd catch up on things. I was sort of her inside person into how the student group was doing and made issues known to her so that she could take care of them because she was the dean. And because she was dean, I felt guilty asking her to be on my dissertation committee, and so I didn't ask her. Instead, I asked Edna. Edna worked with Kendra for 20 or 30 years, together. And so they were very well established as a research pair. And Edna does good research. She's incredibly smart, but socially, she's a bit awkward. She's very blunt. You will know exactly what she thinks of you or what she's thinking. She once told her student who came in with wet hair that looks like she has a dead rat on her head. So, very blunt. Before adding her to my committee, I was warned by the exiting golden child from our lab that Edna could be a bit of a stickler when it came to grammar, but I figured she was better than my other option, which leads us to Louis. Louis was a guy. Quite a guy. Many stories. But Louis started the same year as faculty as I did as a grad student. And I really think that Richard was keen on helping Louis develop and advance his career at our school. Richard encouraged me to put Louis on my master's committee, which I did because I thought, sure, why not? And it was a horrible experience, and there were many horrible experiences basically wherever Louis went. And so I didn't have him on my doctoral committee. And we'll put that right on the pile of things I did that made Richard mad. We're not even into the story yet, and we've already got one. Finally, taking another step back in the department, we've got Phil, who was the department chair at the time and also a friend of Richard. Now that introductions with people are done, a little bit more backstory, and then we'll get into the actual story itself. As I mentioned, I was in my 6th year of grad school, and I was very determined to not have a 7th. I was aggressively job hunting and made it clear to Richard that I wanted to finish that year. Another piece of information is that Richard, as an advisor, was very hands-off. I'm planning a video talking about the difference between advisors and mentors, hands-on, hands-off, and try to figure out what you best need out of an advisor or mentor, and if you don't have that, how to adapt as best you can. But yeah, so Richard was very hands-off, so very much not involved in the goings-on in the lab, and not fingers deep into my writing, or however you want to phrase that, because that was not phrased well. To reiterate again, that I'm focusing on my story, but there were plenty of other students having plenty of their own drama related to Richard going on this year and years prior. We're going to move chronologically through this year, starting in the summer. Prior to the summer, Richard was invited to publish a paper in a special edition of a journal and tapped me to help him on that. So this topic area was Richard's expertise. It's what he did his dissertation on. He knew that stuff. I knew some of it. I hadn't done experiments with it before. And so, I was learning as I went. This was a bit of a shift from what I'd done my master's on, but I was okay doing that for several reasons. First, I desperately needed the publication. And an invited publication is like almost a guaranteed acceptance, so yes, please, I need pubs. Second, and kind of sadly, I desperately still wanted Richard's approval. That summer, the golden child graduated and was gone, and so I thought, as his most senior student in the lab, I thought I would be the person he relied on for help with things. I thought that I would be put on the grant and so be in a research assistant slot instead of a teaching slot. I thought, he'd sort of be more interested in me as a student and as a person. I am planning on making a video on sort of the golden child phenomenon in labs, but just a quick spoiler alert, if when you come in, you aren't the golden child and there is one or there isn't one, you will never become one. You will always not be one. If there is a golden child and they leave, someone else in the current group will not become the golden child. The advisor will probably wait until a new batch comes in and then pick a golden child from that. So, it was a futile attempt on my part to gain favor from him. Finally, I kind of wanted an easy project. The stuff I did my master's on was kind of intensive to program, especially trying to put it into E prime, which I was working on doing. I was right at the point where I'd be able to do that, but it would be much, much more difficult to do than this project that Richard was bringing me in on. This topic area is a lot easier to program by miles than what I had been doing, and if I wanted to finish in a year, I needed an easy project. Well, easy project. And so, all right, let's pivot, let's do this, let's get it done. I pulled Al in on this project because I want to incorporate that technique that he was an expert on, and I want to do it right. So in programming this experiment, I ran the stimuli past Richard and how I implemented the technique past Al. Got feedback from both of them, was good to go, ran it, and so started writing that up in the summer. In the first drafts of the paper, Richard sort of helped with some of the writing. Al absolutely handled discussing his technique stuff. That chunk of the paper was all written by Al. But the results, the discussion, a lot of it was on me, and that's fine. I was a primary author on this paper. I'm planning a video talking about authorship and ownership stuff because it is kind of contentious and very variable between different professors, their philosophy on it. Richard's philosophy was that if a student was involved on a paper, they were doing the bulk of the work, which is fine, whatever, it's his decision. As the drafts progressed, it shifted less from Richard helping with writing to just critiquing the stuff that had been written. And Al would change his portion, and then around draft 15, Al said, you know what, this paper's good enough, let's just send it off. Personality trait of Richard's, though. He will work on something right up until the deadline, and maybe even past it. It can always be improved. Whereas somebody like Al or myself feel like there's a point at which you reach diminishing returns. Yes, you can invest a bunch of time in this project, or you can just send it off, it's good enough, work on something else with your time. That's not Richard's way, though. So, draft 15, Al's like, it's good enough. Richard's like, let's keep going. I'll also mention that pretty much everybody else in our program or in the neighbor program wouldn't revise things past draft 10. By that point, the kinks are worked out enough, it's good enough, let's just get it off and get it to the reviewers. Not Richard, though. After draft 15, Al was pretty much checked out of the process, and it was just me going back and forth with Richard on this document. About a month later, the journal starts breathing down his neck about where's his paper, and so we can finally submit it to them at draft 23. This happened at some point during the semester. I don't remember exactly when. It was probably like October, but I'm just going to open with it, get it out of the way. In the semester, Richard was granted full tenure. So he was a full professor, and part of that process involves giving a talk. He strongly encouraged his students, undergrad and grad, to attend this talk. And so Doug and I went. Not all the grad students in the lab went, but Doug and I went because we were both trying to earn brownie points with Richard. In this talk, he talked about his first grad student, who I believe only published one thing with him in his 5 years at that school. He talked about the Golden Child and the research that she helped with, including one of the papers that I was on and did a lot of work on and for, because it was a driving simulator experiment and that was my jam. And he talked about Connor, who was the student he was co-advising with Sandra, who had died in a freak accident a couple years before. Those were the grad students he talked about. And honestly, him talking about Connor felt like he was patting himself on the back more than anything, because Richard and Sandra really pushed after Connor died to publish his master's research with him as first author. I mean, it's cool that they did that for Connor, but it's also kind of gross that he doesn't help his living students that much. Anyways, I bring up who he was talking about in his talk because he didn't acknowledge Doug or I once. We were in the room. He could have mentioned like, oh, hey, Cass there? Yeah, she helped with the driving simulator experiment. Nope, no acknowledgement of us whatsoever. He also joked during the talk that he spent at least a day, if not a couple, trying to animate the beginning of his talk so it did the Star Wars crawl. The problem with that, and granted, I know, there's more to being a faculty member than just your grad students. We are not their only priority. However, I was really pushing to get my dissertation proposal finalized, and Doug was trying to keep his ass off of academic probation in the program. He was on thin ice and waiting on stuff from Richard. Waiting. And Richard was spending his time animating part of his promotion and tenure talk so it looked like Star Wars. I think it was like 15 seconds of his talk. And he spent over a day on that when he had students desperately needing feedback from him. Also going on throughout this year is the academic job search, which I talk about card somewhere. So something else to just add to the stack of me making Richard angry. That whole process made him angry. At the start of this semester, I told Richard that I wanted to be done. This was my last year at grad school. I was going to do everything in my power to make this happen. As such, I needed to write my dissertation proposal. And in our program and in the neighbor program, these were almost never past 35 pages long. These were usually just a formality, a rough idea of what was going to be in the dissertation, and I know this because our program kept an archive of previous students' work. Proposals, qualifying exams, thesis, we had them. So I saw what everybody else who had done the program did. And Richard's description of what I needed was, of course, as always, vague. It needs to be as long as it needs to be. Great. So using what I saw of the previous students, I wrote something, it was around 30 pages, and I sent it off to him. Of course, this first draft was absolutely hated by Richard. Given how my master's went, my qualifying exam, this was of no surprise to me. Okay, fine, whatever. Let's just move on with this process. In November, we're sitting around draft 10 of this. Of course, it's going into a crazy number of drafts, just like always. And I'm not really making headway. I'm making the changes that he's suggesting, and it seems to only be making things worse. It's probably sitting at around 100 pages by this point, but it's still lacking in specificity. I'm not saying what analysis I'm going to be doing thoroughly enough. My methods aren't clear. According to him, this information isn't there. Granted, I know quantity does not equal quality, but you would think that in 100 pages, I would have something workable that could be trimmed back to what he's expecting of me. Around this time, I happen to run into Kendra, and, we sort of catch up a little bit. And I tell her that the proposal process is going as I'd feared it would and isn't going well. She asks me for a little bit more information. I tell her a little bit more about how it feels like the writing that I do is never good enough for him, and it's always just down to the deadline, and then, it's not good, but it'll get through. I also tell her that, I am trying in earnest to change these things, and I can't understand what I'm doing wrong. A little bit more context, I took a class from her and got an A+. So, at least in her eyes, I'm not a complete idiot. I sent her the email exchanges between Richard and myself, where I'm sending him a draft, he's sending me feedback. Sometimes he's giving me feedback on the draft, sometimes it's just a couple paragraphs in the email of things in general I need to change, which, again, is unusual, at least in our program. Usually it's very pointed feedback. And I tell her that I feel like he's starting to personally attack me as a researcher, as a student, as a person. And she agrees that the tone in the email is becoming worrisome. My end, I'm trying to be professional, not be emotional, because, women be crazy. So very professional, very serious, and where his responses are getting kind of angry and nasty. I tell her I want to switch advisors. I feel like, given how everything has gone in the past, that this is just going to be an awful process, and I want to switch. I want to do it under Sandra and Al. I want to be co-advised by them, have them help, because they're going to actually be helpful in this instead of just this obstructive jerk. She tells me it's too late in the process to switch, and so I need to try to make it work. But then she also has me talk to Sandra sort of without Richard's knowledge, because we agreed that he would not take it well if I was seeking outside help. So I talked to Sandra, I sent her the drafts along with the feedback I was getting from Richard, and she's able to give me some useful feedback and try to pull out what he's actually asking me to do. I also bring up the idea of switching advisors with her. I don't necessarily say that I want to switch to her, just that I want not to finish this under Richard. And she also says that it's too late in the process. I just need to tough it out as best I can. And both Kendra and Sandra are telling me that, okay, maybe Richard's being really hard and ridiculous on this part, so that when you get to your final dissertation, you can just pull what you've written from your proposal, change the tense, and throw it in your dissertation and it'll be done. In theory. Okay, fine, whatever. I was trying to have my proposal done at the end of the semester, so I'd have all winter break to program. And last day I could basically send it out and have this happen, Richard tells me, it's nowhere close to done. Why are you thinking you can send this out to the committee already? In addition to this, or not in addition to this, he won't give me specifics. He just gives me a couple big ideas of things that need to be changed, and I just need to go implement them, because that's worked so fucking great up to this point. I go back to my office in tears. My husband was waiting for me because it was the last day before the finals week, and we were going to go home and have a good weekend. But now I'm crying, and I'm frustrated because nothing ever goes the way I'd like it to with Richard. My husband suggests that, okay, he's not giving me explicit feedback. Print out a copy, all 100 whatever pages of it, go back to his office and not leave until he gives me explicit concrete feedback on what I need to change to make it acceptable for the committee. I go back, printed copy in hand, and I hand it to Richard, and he's giving me this look of like, what? What are you doing here? I told you it wasn't good. And I told him like I needed concrete feedback on what I need to change because I'm not understanding what he's wanting from me. He hands me back the printed copy, tells me like, I'll send you an email, but it's not ready yet. It needs changed on this, this, and this, and I've told you that, and why aren't you understanding that? Thankfully, Sandra was able to give me useful help on this, and it's finally good enough to go around to committee. Again, final size of this was around 100 pages, and done in the hopes of being able to just turn this into my dissertation without having to overhaul things a bunch. I program my experiments over winter break anyways, even though they haven't been approved by the committee, because when else am I going to have the time? But okay, fine, whatever. I might have to tweak them after the proposal meeting, but at least it's sort of done. A couple of days before Christmas, I get an email from Richard. He heard back from the journal that basically the paper we had submitted at the beginning of fall needed to be redone. In his email, he said, "As I had feared, the critical flaw in this experiment was too much to overlook." What critical flaw, Richard? What flaw? So apparently in this topic, there's weird little things about the stimuli that you need to be careful with. And it's sort of in the literature if you know what you're looking for. I didn't know what I was looking for. I thought I'd program the experiments okay. I ran the stimuli past Richard, and he signed off on them. He told me that they were fine. But apparently, there was a critical flaw, a fatal flaw, in this experiment that I didn't know about and that he should have as the expert. I don't know why he didn't catch this flaw. If it was laziness, if it was just him being stupid, if it was some weird power thing so that he could pull this sort of crap, I don't understand why this happened. And then it dawned on me that this wasn't the first time that this had happened. This happened to Connor when he was doing his master's. My first year of grad school, Connor was all set to defend his master's thesis. He had the flyers up, it was all set. And then like the day before he was supposed to defend it, I see him in the hallway pulling the flyers advertising his defense down. Like, Connor, like, what's wrong? Like, why are you pulling these down? And he told me that Richard discovered a critical flaw in his stimuli on the same topic that was too much to overlook, and he needed to redo his complete master's. He had to throw out all of his data and rerun the experiments after fixing the stimuli. The day before he was going to defend his master's, Richard discovered this. Again, like, how does this keep happening? It's the same sort of issue, just different variants of it. And I think the problem in my first experiment and Connor's master's thesis, it was the same thing. I didn't know it was the same thing until after, but it was the same stupid issue. Richard advised both of us. You would think this would be a thing he would look for in the experiment design phase instead of after it's been submitted for publication, but apparently not. And because Connor had to postpone his master's for a year, one, he had to redo all of that and rewrite all of that, reanalyze and everything, which sucked. But to me, importantly, because he didn't have a master's, he wasn't able to take a little pay bump and teach labs, because you have to have a master's degree to teach labs. And he had to postpone that a year and continue just being a teaching assistant. So that was $2,000 or $3,000 a year he was missing out on when our stipend starting out was like $15,000. It kind of matters with things like this. So, bottom line, end of winter, find out I need to rerun my experiment 1 in addition to my dissertation experiments that would be new. Okay, fine, whatever. Let's get it done. So my proposal was before school started in the spring, and on my committee, we had Richard, who was the committee chair, Sandra, who was also on my master's, Al, who was basically an extra person. We only had to have 4, but I had 5. Al, because I wanted him to get credit for him helping me as much as he was on these experiments. Edna, as my inside psychology but outside program person, and a guy from computer science who I had networked through Sandra. As I said earlier, Edna, being on my committee, upset Richard, so just add that to the pile because it wasn't Louis. Also, adding to the pile of upsetting Richard, having the computer science guy I did upset him because I wasn't using his usual friend guy from, I think, business that he usually wanted students to use as their outside person. Because I had to go my own way and find my own person who was much more relevant to my dissertation and research interests and everything. That's no good. Upset Richard. I mean, this guy even had me speak at his lab meeting once about my research. Like, come on, what advisor wouldn't be excited about that? In my proposal, I proposed 4 experiments. Experiment 1, which had to be redone. Experiment 2, which was sort of a variant at experiment 1, further implementing Al's technique and trying to get at the nature of some consciousness stuff. Experiments 3 and 4 were a different experimental technique than the one that Richard was an expert on, and trying to get at the central question of my thesis from a different way. So kind of 2-pronged approach there, but still implementing Al's technique. As I said before, these weren't necessarily my central research interests like I had done my master's on, but they would be easy to run, easy to do. Let's get this done. At the end of my proposal, I had a Gantt chart, and I'll put up an example of one somewhere. Basically, it's like a project management sort of thing where you have a timeline of how long each step of the project's going to take. So for this, running experiment 1, analyzing experiment 1, writing experiment 1. Running experiment 2, analyzing, writing, 3, 4. And I had it mapped out with a conservative estimate of how long each experiment would take to run, assuming I had a 10% no-show rate, which was actually a kind of high estimate, but as I said, conservative, and it projected that I could be done by like April or May. I was like, see, it's possible. I just need to work, and I can work. I'm driven. And Richard was just sort of like, no, get that off the screen. That's not happening. Forget it. He wouldn't even discuss my timeline. Comments from the committee. Experiments 3 and 4 are redundant. I agreed, told them that when I was practicing it that morning, it occurred to me like, yeah, they were sort of redundant, and I agreed, let's just do experiment 4, cut experiment 3. Cool. Makes my timeline even more feasible. Edna had serious writing concerns, but she didn't elaborate on what she meant by that, and Richard didn't press her for more information, so it was sort of just left hanging that there were serious writing concerns about my proposal. Sandra, Al, and the computer science guy were all cool with the experiments. Let's do this. Everything looks good. Richard was fine with the stimuli in all the experiments, which I included in painful detail, so if there was another one of these little problems that I wasn't catching, he should catch it. The day after my proposal meeting, Al was found dead by his ex-wife in his apartment. He was supposed to be driven by her to the airport, but we were told, and the official story was that he had died of a heart attack. Several months later, I found out from his students that it wasn't a heart attack. He had actually overdosed accidentally on pain medication. Apparently, before he had gone back to grad school, because he did that as a non-traditional student, he'd had a problem with pain meds, but had fixed it, or kicked the habit, sort of. And the year before this, he broke his arm and was put on pain medication again, and apparently it just spiraled from there. Now we're in the spring semester. I'm writing my experiments, and I'm also pushing to have as much communication as I can with Richard through email. I feel like I'm having to document everything and cover my butt as much as possible because it's just not going well, and I feel like it's only going to go more sideways than it is already. I speak to Edna about what her serious writing concerns were, and it was basically just an inconsistent tensing issue. And I think a huge part of this is because Experiment 1 was basically off to the reviewers, dumped into the proposal, and then Experiments 2 through 4 were future tense. And I didn't catch all the tenses being changed or know how to change the tenses for something I'd already done in something like this. And of course, Richard was no help there. But that was her serious writing issue. It's just tense. That was it. That's easy to fix, especially when everything is in the present perfect tense like it is in APA format, and it's consistent through the whole document. I can do that. I tell Richard this. He still wants me to go to the writing center because of her serious writing concerns, even though it was just a tensing issue. I mean, he thinks I'm a horrible writer, so of course he wants me to go there. To cut ahead a little bit briefly, when I had my dissertation finished, I took it to the writing center, told them my advisor wanted me to see them because of a previous tensing issue. The undergrad who was staffing the writing center at the time had to Google what present perfect tense was and what that meant, read through part of my stuff, and was like, it's fine. At the risk of triggering yeah, that happened, she told me it was some of the best writing she'd seen. I mean, she was used to dealing with undergrads who were failing English, not grad students whose advisors had a thing against their writing. Okay, fine, whatever. I went to the writing center. I did my due diligence there. So spring semester starts. I hit the ground running. I have a full team of research assistants running experiments for me. They're going from 8 a.m. to 6 or 7 at night, 5 days a week. They get weekends off. I have an army, so each student is only doing, a couple hours a week, but I have enough of them. I've got full coverage. And if one of them can't show up, I'm in the lab running them myself. I am churning through these experiments, gathering data fast. I'm running this in what was basically a glorified closet. I have to share this room with Doug. Hopefully I still have a picture of this because it was something, and it was Richard's choice to have it set up the way it was. Okay, fine, whatever. My participants are crawling over Doug's participants, but fine, whatever. I'm analyzing and writing as I go. Experiment 1's done, I'm writing it while Experiment 2's going. Experiment 2's done, I'm analyzing it, I'm writing it, Experiment 3's going. I am getting this done, and I'm handing drafts over to Richard as soon as I've got them done. And pretty much I'm not getting feedback, which is great. Early into the semester, probably in February, I'm tapped by Richard to teach an upper-level undergraduate course the following year. I'm told that teaching this course is the only way I will have funding as a graduate student the following year because otherwise they can't support a 7th-year student. Never mind his grant money. Never mind that there are actually other mechanisms to support students. Fine. I tell him maybe I'll do it. I tell Richard and BCC, Kendra, and Sandra on this email that I'm pushing for a June defense date and attached experiments 2 and 3 in their final state. At this point, I'm working on writing the conclusion section of my dissertation, but I do ask him for feedback. In April, we find out that my husband has secured a postdoc, so yay him, he found a job. And that it's going to be in a different country. Yay, complicated. I tell Richard this, along with reattaching the experiment 2 and 3, and saying, I need to finish this summer before I move. This email is basically ignored by Richard, in all ways possible. I never received feedback on those drafts, and he never really acknowledged that I was leaving. So, okay, fine, whatever, situation normal. After this, I'm tapped by Kevin, the program coordinator, to teach 2 upper-level undergraduate courses the following year. Not 1, but 2. And I tell him, like, I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to teach those courses for you. I'm going to be living in a different country with my husband. My husband got a postdoc. It's going to be cool. And it looks like I'll probably be able to adjunct there. I'm going to be gone after this summer. And he replies like, oh, cool, awesome. Congrats to your husband. It sounds like you're doing what's best for you in this situation. Which was a very Kevin thing to say, but whatever. Talk about Kevin another day. About a week after I replied to Kevin's email, while I'm meeting with Richard in person about my dissertation stuff, he again brings up these 2 classes that would be really awesome for me to teach. And he says, again, that this is the only way I'll have funding next year, and that I'd also be doing the department a favor. Doing the department a favor, if you're not catching the subtext there, basically means that by having a grad student teach these upper-level undergraduate courses, not just labs, courses, the department would be saving money because they'd have to pay me, or they would be paying me, the grad student rate instead of the PhD rate. And again, I tell Richard, I'm not going to be here next year. I'm going to move with my husband to his postdoc. And he's sort of like, well, no, you really need to stay here and finish. And it's really looking like you need another year, and you really need to teach these classes. So it's kind of all mixed up. And like I reiterate, like this is a life thing. This is something that Kendra told me to try. This is a life thing that's happening, and I need to roll with it. I'm not going to be here. But that was, again, sort of just not acknowledged in a really awkward way in his office. I handed off the first draft of my dissertation to Richard in early May. Richard, not surprisingly, hates every bit of it. Of note, Lily is going to be moving in the summer because she's got a job lined up to be a teacher/admin person at a different college. And my husband has a job lined up and is still running experiments for his dissertation. I have my dissertation done, but I don't have a job lined up. So it's not surprising that Richard hates what I've given him, but remember what I was told as sort of my rallying cry for my dissertation proposal by Sandra and Kendra, that I was being put through hell on the proposal so that the writing process would be faster and smoother. And of course, Richard hates everything and wants me to tear it apart and start over. And so that completely defeats the purpose of going through hell on the proposal, but fine, whatever. Because I'm not understanding what Richard is wanting from me bad enough, and he's only really commenting on my intro, I again ask Sandra for help. She's able to take a look at it, give me a really broad sense of what Richard was wanting, and give me some ideas on how to fix it. Under her advice, I throw away my intro. All of that hard work, whatever, it's gone. I rewrite my intro from scratch. I recycle the references, but everything is new. The organization is new, how I'm phrasing things is new. My conceptualization of the model is new. It's all fresh and from scratch. None of it was recycled. I'm emphasizing this because it'll be important. In the summer, if you were lucky, you might teach a lab for funding. There were also undergraduate research programs that we could sometimes get a little bit of cash from. And I wasn't tapped for the usual ones. I applied for them, but I didn't get the usual programs I ran. Normally, I handled the driving simulator, applying to graduate school, and a couple other things, and I didn't get them. And okay, fine, maybe it's because I was leaving. At the end of the summer, they wanted to give it to other students. That logic would be fine, except my friend Lily, who was also moving at the end of the summer and had already defended, she got some. She got the ones she normally did. So what's up with that? Sandra and Kendra are still kind of supporting me from behind the scenes, but are really pushing for me to try to appease Richard. Even though I feel like it's not possible, they really think it's possible to do that. Somehow I'll be able to get him to come to his senses, realize that I'm moving, and try to make it happen for me. Kendra gave me the phrase, which I'd never heard before but makes total sense, moving the goalposts, because Richard was continually moving the goalposts on me. I meet whatever criteria he'd set. Suddenly that's no longer good enough. The goalposts are now further down the field. I get those things fixed further down the field, and it's just continually moving the goalposts on me. And even though he's doing that, she still wants me to finish under him and try to make him happy. I have, at this point in the process, a deep gut feeling that Richard will never let me finish. He'll never let me defend. I don't know if it's as a punishment for not teaching those courses. I don't know if it's him trying to force me into living separately from my husband and teaching those courses. I don't know if it's a punishment for Louis being denied tenure, which I was kind of instrumental in. And I don't know if it was some combination of those things, something completely separate from that. I really don't know. But I just have this deep sense that I can't shake that he won't let me finish no matter what I do. I look for other avenues to try to find a solution to this problem. I contact the ombudsman of the university, as there's somebody who's supposed to help with conflicts, among other things. I'm still not entirely sure what they do. They get back to me and tell me that because I'm not an actual employee of the university, they can't help me. Okay, but they tell me to try the mediators. So I contact the mediation office. Their job is to help with conflicts between students or between students and faculty. And mine was definitely evolving into a student and faculty conflict, let's say. I met with the mediator many times. She always had things for me to try, things for me to say, things for me to do, and I tried them. And every single time, without fail, it made the situation worse. Every single time. We finally reached a point where her only solution left was to bring Richard in and have a sit down with the three of us. Given how things were going, I told her this was probably an awful idea. He would definitely hate that I went to somebody else for help and opened up the problems that we were having, because he was very much about his image. And she agreed, and so that was the last I spoke to her. That was another dead end. Then we reach a perfect encapsulation of how revisioning with Richard went. Around draft 10, Richard has my latest draft with the revamped intro. He rereads the first draft. And let me just say, Richard prefers to work in Word, because then he can use the little revisioning things to just insert little comments that you can work through. But I was writing my dissertation in LaTeX. And so the only output that I could really give Richard to work with was a PDF file. He did not want the tech file, especially with how much venting I was doing in the comments of it. He got the PDF. And so he was using the PDF markup tools to leave comments for me. So he rereads the first draft. And also, these drafts, it's like my name, dissertation, _ version, whatever. He opened the wrong version. He's rereading it. And he's seeing his comments from the first time he read it. And he's rereading it anyways. He's commenting over his comments and getting angrier as he goes through the draft. It's going from like, change this, what's this, to why is this here? Why is this still here? Why haven't you changed this? To, are you even changing anything in this? Why am I even commenting? Like, he's definitely getting madder as he's going through this draft. At some point, he realized he was reading the wrong draft, as he told me in the email he sent. He attached version 1 with these new comments and told me that these comments still apply to the current draft and that I need to implement these changes. even though the introduction is completely different, and I wouldn't even know where to begin implementing these changes on my current draft. I'm keeping Kendra and Sandra in the loop about these things, and I forward the emails that I'm getting and the feedback I'm getting from Richard, and Kendra brings Edna into the loop as well because she is becoming increasingly concerned by the tone of the emails I'm receiving from Richard. I only meet with any of them in person when Richard is not going to be there, and I know he's not going to be there because I figure he would be very upset if he knew I was getting outside help. I was making sure he was out to lunch, he was out that day if I was going to meet with them in person, and I was very sure that the emails were only going to the people I specified and that it wasn't being accidentally sent to the wrong people. I was very careful to cover my tracks here. About 2 weeks before I'm supposed to send my dissertation out to the committee, I get an email from Richard. In this email, he asks me for the latest draft, implying that, I'm the one who's holding up this process. He tries to shame me for not being on campus when he was, even though in the email he admits that in the previous week, he'd only been on campus a couple of hours for 2 days, whereas I had been on campus a lot of hours, many days. It just didn't end up coinciding with when he happened to be there. And then part that I'm going to quote because it just blew my mind. We also need to talk about what your expectations are moving forward, since I am hearing you have been airing some complaints, and you seem to be developing a somewhat discordant attitude in our interactions. Discordant? Discordant? I know obscure words. That was a new one. So first I had to look it up. So, discordant, definition quickly, is disagreeing or incongruous. I was discordant because I had started to stand up for myself against him. I was standing up for my research, I was standing up for what I thought was right, and I was trying to stand up for things that Kendra had sort of told me to try and reinforce. That my dissertation proposal was a contract between me and the committee. And if I did what was in the contract, and I was able to defend what I did in the contract, then I would be given a PhD by the committee. Unsurprisingly, there was a new fatal flaw that Richard discovered in my second experiment, which of course, again, he had access to my stimuli spelled out in painful detail, and yet he still couldn't see this other version of a fatal flaw that I didn't know to look for or think to look for. But, and I ran this past Kendra, the dean, this was in the contract. This error was there in the contract. I ran what was approved by the contract and by the committee. I deserve my PhD. This fatal flaw didn't completely invalidate the experiment, in my opinion. It made some of the interpretations less clear and some of the results a little less strong, but I knew how to analyze around it. I could compensate for this, but he wanted me to completely rerun my second experiment. And I was like, no. I was standing up for myself. I was also discordant because I wasn't budging on not separating from my husband to do the department a fucking solid and teach those courses at a cheap rate. I was discordant because I had the gall to be a woman and have an opinion and not just go with what he wanted. I know for a fact that the guys in the lab could pull the same sort of stuff, stand up for their experiments, stand up against him, defend themselves as you do in research, and they would be rewarded for that. They would be praised for it, but because I was doing it, I was discordant. By the way, dear viewer, did you know that Eris was a Greek goddess of discord and strife? Just saying. Also, airing complaints. What could this mean? Well, somehow he found out that I was in some way working with other people through this process. The thought crossed my mind that maybe it was Edna, because she could lack common sense on some things, and maybe she'd let it slip to him, or maybe he talked to her and it came out. I don't know. I find that scenario unlikely because of how tight a working relationship, Kendra and Edna had, and it really seemed like Kendra had emphasized how bad my situation was with Richard, and Edna wouldn't have tried to disrupt that. But then there's Kevin, the program coordinator. Kevin, whose office is right between Richard's and Sandra's. Kevin, who is almost always on campus. Kevin, who was frequently there when I was going down the office hallway to talk with people in private. Maybe. About a week later, on the day of Lily's wedding rehearsal, I'm in her wedding party, so, I've got my nails done, looking pretty, and I managed to squeeze a meeting out of Richard. It was very hard to do because he's a very busy man. In this meeting, Richard tells me that if I move forward with the dissertation defense, he will convince the committee to fail me. Regardless of whatever merits there, he will convince the committee to fail me. He tells me that I'm not living up to my potential, and he tells me that I'm not yet demonstrating a doctoral level of thought. I try to not think about it the night of the rehearsal, try and have wedding fun, but then after much thought, the next morning, on the day of Lily's wedding, sound like I'm in The Godfather. On the day of my friend's wedding, you come to me with this. On the day of Lily's wedding, I send out an email to my committee that the defense is being postponed indefinitely. So before the wedding, my husband and I are hanging out with a couple ex-grad students they'd graduated the year before who came back for Lily's wedding. Guy and a chick, they're married. They got married the year before. And so we're catching up on things, and I was telling them about my situation with Richard and how horrible it was going. So I found out some stuff I didn't know. So I did know that the woman in the relationship defended, there was a little bit of drama, but it was fine, and she had a job lined up. Full tenure track position at a university. And her husband was going to move with her. And originally, he didn't have a job lined up. His dissertation was all ready to go, but his advisor, who is not anybody I've talked about so far, but in our program, told him basically the same things that Richard told me. He would be failed if he tried to move forward with his dissertation and without her approval, the advisor's approval. He was not living up to his potential, and he was not yet demonstrating a doctoral level of thought. That changed the instant he was given a job opening at the school with his wife. They made a spousal hire happen. They got him a position. It wasn't a great one, like it wasn't tenure track or anything, but it was something, and it was enough for his advisor to instantly change her opinion. Just poof. Everything's fine. Let's get you defended and out the door. Great. Good job. You're awesome. Good job. It's been great working with you. You're a great student. Totally glad to have had you as a PhD student. Complete change of tune as soon as he had a job. So the takeaway from this, and Lily, and previous students in the program, the thing that matters isn't the quality of your research, isn't the caliber of your writing. It's whether or not you have a job that is of appropriate quality. If it's not up to their standards, they will keep you, or they will delay your defense until you get something that they approve of. Because it's all about their freaking reputation. For the record, I'm not on the alumni page. To cut ahead, I've graduated, but there is a conspicuous absence of me on the alumni page because I'm not worth bragging about. So at this point in the story, we get more into dark territory. Lily's wedding is over. I am out of the pressure of wearing the bridesmaid dress, which was something I would never wear in a million years, but I wore it for Lily because she asked me to. It was a short dress. and it was strapless, so sleeveless. Wedding's over, I start self-harming again. Personally, I'm not going to go into detail, but it was something I hadn't done since middle school. And suddenly I'm in my late 20s doing this because the stress is too much for me. More revisions happen, more angry comments from Richard. Sandra makes a suggestion that, okay, if he's going to be uppity and pedantic, treat him like an uppity and pedantic reviewer like you would from a journal, because I had tons of experience with that. So what you do, if you're not familiar, is even if it is a positive reviewer, you need to kind of go through point by point that the reviewer has and say, like, yeah, you're doing these changes that they ask for, or no, I don't think these changes are justified because of whatever. So I think on this draft that I did this on, Richard had read partway through experiment 2. So I had my intro, I had experiment 1, experiment 2, experiment 3, and then a conclusions. And this was the furthest I ever have evidence of him reading in. I don't know if he ever read the entire dissertation, but I'm going through all 100 plus points of things he wants me to change, point by point. Yes, I'm making this change. I changed this to this. I made this change from this to this. No, I don't think this change is justified because whatever. No, I don't think this point is justified because of this paper here that talks about the stuff and your point is without merit. So it was a very long email. I think that was probably a bad idea in the grand scheme of things because that was the last time I received explicit feedback on my draft and not just a vague email from him. So, like, another piece of advice that backfired horribly. Fine, whatever. As we're going and only working off these vague emails, Richard continues to move the goalposts on me. I change the things as best I can, especially with the help from Sandra. Thank you, Sandra. If you're watching this for some reason, it is appreciated. But Richard continues to move the goalposts on me. After this process goes on for a little bit, he tells me, you know what? Just throw it all out. Throw out all your data, throw out all your writing, start the entire thing over from scratch. You know what? You might even auto-propose again. It's that bad. I meet with Kevin, the program coordinator, under the advice of Kendra. She is still very much trying to be behind the scenes on this, not involved because it's not a good look for the dean. And so I'm going up the official channel. I meet with the program coordinator because I'm having a problem with my advisor. I tell him everything about I'm trying to do my best on these drafts with what I understand the problems to be, and it seems like it's only getting worse. Richard's only getting angrier. Here's some emails he sent me where he's personally attacking me. Like, look, this is my situation and it's bad. Kevin tells me that Richard has never done wrong by him, and so I just need to work harder. He also, in so many words, tells me he can't help me. A little bit of context for Kevin. He is up for promotion and tenure review. He is trying to get that first bump, and Richard is the chair of his promotion and tenure committee. I was told by Kendra at some point in this that Richard is known to throw his weight around on things to get his way. And I wouldn't be surprised if Kevin was either brown-nosing by telling me the things he did or trying to stay in Richard's good graces. Either way, he couldn't help me. And when I updated Kendra with how this went, Kendra was disgusted that Kevin would even take on the program coordinator role if he knew he wouldn't be willing to stand up for students in the event their advisor was being a jerk. Despite all of this, and despite Richard telling me to throw everything away, Sandra, Kendra, Edna, and even my husband want me to try to make Richard happy, to appease him somehow, to see the merit in what I've done, to somehow change his tune and honor the contract. At this point, I've exhausted my options on what I can do. My situation is only getting worse. There is no getting better. I'm out of hope. I feel like I'm out of help, and I'm out of options. There's just me in this futile attempt of trying to finish my PhD. Beginning of July, I wake up in bed one day after getting some sleep, which was so welcome. But I know, down to like every cell of my being, that if I get out of bed, I'm going to kill myself. Again, not going to go into what I had planned, but I just knew I would go and I would end it. I was that desperate. I can't walk away from my PhD. I mean, I've been told that by Kendra and Sandra. Like, I'm so close to being done, I can't just walk away from it. I just need to tough it out or whatever, but I can't walk away from it. Like, it's done. It's there, and it's done, and it's never going to be good enough for Richard. Ever. So, I'm never gonna finish. I can't. I'm not going to stay another year separately from my husband. We can't afford that. Like, we have to live together for no other reason than housing costs. Like, I can't afford to live by myself on a grad student stipend. But he's not gonna let me finish before I leave, so I have to walk away from it because he wants me to throw everything away. What am I supposed to do? Like, and then, there's also the possibility that Richard's right. Everything I have written is just garbage, and my experiments are trash, and I'm a horrible researcher, and completely not living up to my potential, and not demonstrating a doctoral level of thought, and am an idiot and incompetent, and he's right about everything. If it is the case that I'm that awful at everything, like, my life is a lie, and I really can't go on that way. I have tried to change things, and nothing works. Nothing has made it better, it only gets worse. And I am the drowning rat. I can't keep swimming forever. Time to start drowning. So, I stay in bed for over an hour, crying very intensely, and trying to get a hold of my husband, Googling things, just trying anything, just doing everything in my power not to just go and end it. And of course, cosmic fortune being what it is, I can't get a hold of my husband. He's in his lab running stuff and he can't have his phone on him, so I can't get a hold of him. Lily is beyond busy with her moving, and so, I can't get a hold of her. So there's just me and my thoughts. And Google's only really returning stuff on grad students, killing themselves either in the lab or in their advisor's office because they've reached a similar situation. Which, while it's useful to know you're not alone, it was not helpful, Google. Not at the time. And then somehow I remember that our school had a mental health center that was thankfully a separate building from the psych department. And so I managed to will myself there, sign the little check-in form, still sobbing, just uncontrollably. I'm seen by a social worker, do the intake interview, tell her everything. Thoughts of ending my life, the suicidal ideations that had existed before then, the situation that led to this, all of it. And she sets me up with a psychologist that's in the staff. And so, of course, my priorities being what they are, my biggest fear is how much this is going to cost, because I didn't have health insurance. Because I couldn't afford it. Thankfully, I guess the student fees were good for something, because I was never charged for these things. So there's that. The psychologist I met with listened to me, my situation, and his suggestion was that I sue the department for my degree because they weren't honoring their contract. The sad thing is I wouldn't be the first student to do this in this department. Another student, I think she was in counseling, had a difficult advisor situation. He wasn't honoring her dissertation, and so she sued the school, and she got her PhD that way. And no. Like, one, I don't have the money for a lawsuit or lawyers or any of that, or the time required. Like, I'm going to be out of the country in a couple months. No. And also, to me, that feels like cheating. Like, I want to earn it. I want the PhD to be given willingly, not because some court is telling them they have to, otherwise they're going to be fined or something, you know? Like, I want to earn it, and that's not it. But the handful of meetings I had with a psychologist, you know, they were hour-long sessions, and that was basically him just trying to convince me to sue the school. So that wasn't helpful. Then I catch up with Kendra over lunch at a lovely little Mexican place that was near campus, and I basically lay it all out for her. The breakdown, how close I came. I hardly touched my tacos. And I mean, it was hard to tell her all of it, but that's where I was. And I think that kind of helped her understand how bad the situation had gotten and how it wasn't going to get fixed. As I've said repeatedly, Kendra was not trying to be officially involved because, one, bad luck for the dean to sort of be meddling in these affairs, and two, she was also instrumental in Louis being denied tenure. Again, Richard's sort of friend that he wanted to see succeed and had been denied, specifically by Kendra. But she was much more motivated now to try to make things happen for me. And so she set up a meeting with the vice provost of the grad school for me. In the meeting with the vice provost, I have my stupid little printouts of the emails and some of the feedback and everything. And I tell her what went on. Kendra sort of reinforces what I've said. And the vice provost, basic summary of her points was that Richard's a bully and a misogynist. And I don't know if she had dealings with Richard before, that she would have these strong an opinion, or if it was just sort of from my treatment. With how willing she was to say those things, I'm guessing she'd had other experiences with Richard, but that's just speculation on my point. She agrees that something needs to be done, but it needs to not have her hand in doing it. Again, it was interesting to hear the vice provost's opinion on Richard, because between her and Kendra, like Kendra at a different point told me that she refused to let her students have anything to do with Richard at all, like not even take classes from him if they could avoid it. So, you know, I thought he just didn't like me, but maybe there's something deeper going on. I don't know. Kendra, as dean, establishes a protocol for students who are leaving without having their PhDs finished. As it works out, Lily's husband was another one, myself and some other people in other programs were moving without their dissertations defended. And so she instituted a new protocol for these students that their advisor was to meet with the student and then fill out this little worksheet thing that she sent around to the people impacted by this, the advisors impacted by this. And in it, they were supposed to say like what the goals were or milestones that still needed to be reached were, and then outline a schedule. And this was supposed to be an explicit schedule of advisor will receive draft from student on this date, advisor will have draft of student this date. This date, this date. This date, the dissertation will go out to committee. On this date, the defense will happen. Explicit. No wiggle room. So, thankfully and unsurprisingly, Richard failed this with flying colors. He didn't contact me at all. Email, in person, nothing about this. So, that's already a failure. If it wasn't for the behind-the-scenes stuff, I wouldn't have even known this was a thing, and I would have just left. Second, his goals or milestones for me were very vague, of course, not surprising. And he made no attempt at outlining a schedule, just that it'll be done when it's done. This was not satisfactory for Kendra, and she was able to act in a more official manner. I was finally able to change advisors. Finally. Almost a year after I wanted to do this, I'm finally given permission to do so. I meet with Sandra, and I update her about the breakdown, about the complete breakdown of the process with Richard. The thing he was supposed to fill out showed her what he had filled out and how inadequate it was. And then hedging it in terms of like, I understand this is a really huge ask of you, and I definitely, tell me no if this is too much, but I would like you to be my advisor. I would like you to take over as my advisor on this. And I know this is a huge ask because you are going to have to be here in the department with Richard when I'm gone. And I don't want it to be painful or awkward for you. So if you want to say no, say no. No judgments from me. I totally understand. Thankfully, Sandra is much more senior than Richard in the department. He has no power over her. She is able to land huge grants, completely independent of Richard. Richard struggles at getting grants. It's amazing. So, as far as their dynamic, he has no power over her. And also, she's an amazing, strong woman, and some of the shit she has to put up with because of the way she lives her life is amazing. Story for another day. So she says yes. She says it'll have to wait. I'm 2 weeks out from moving out of country, so I totally understand, but her saying she would take over as my advisor was enough. There was a light at the end of the tunnel, at least. She also said I would be able to defend remotely because I made it very clear I was not going to be able to afford to fly back. There's no way. And so she said that somehow we'd make it work and I would be able to defend remotely. The second to last insult in this whole process, Sandra and I meet with Phil, who's the department chair and a friend of Richard's, to have him sign the change advisor form. In this meeting, he asks me, why didn't I do this before now? Why didn't I change advisors at any point before now? Excuse me? What the fuck? The entire time I've been told I can't change advisors. It's too late to change advisors. And he's sitting there telling me I could have done it at any point. And I know he's probably heard about me. Richard is more than fond of throwing people under the bus to make himself look good. I've probably been under the bus so many times. Especially because I wouldn't take a class that they did together, but whatever. And he's sitting there telling me I could have done it whenever? All of this pain and suffering and darkness was unnecessary. After that meeting, I take the form right to Richard's office. He's there. I'm like, hey, so it hasn't been working out too well between the two of us. I think you'd agree. So I'd like to change advisors. Would you please sign this form? He signs the form and is like, best of luck. And that's it. No more Richard. Over the next couple months, I'm working with Sandra over email, trying to get the dissertation in good order. And in addition to writing this in LaTeX, I've been doing the revisioning through SVN. So I have access to my old versions of the draft. And basically, working with her on the dissertation, I undid damage I did to the dissertation trying to make Richard happy. She's having me revert things back to what it was before I mutilated it to try to make him happy. It gave me a little hope that maybe I'm not such a shit writer after all because, my self-esteem is still trashed about my writing. I have no confidence in my writing ability because of Richard. I defended remotely without incident, really. There was a little technical issue at one point, but the defense itself went fine. It was about 30 minutes because Sandra likes her students to keep it brief and to the point. If the committee has questions, they can ask them. It doesn't need to be all spelled out in an hour-long defense. Guess what Richard wants? There were some questions. I was able to answer them. There were some concerns. I was able to say, yes, I've thought of those. I did specific analyses for those. It's not an issue. I thought about it. I'm defending it. I can think about this stuff. I'm demonstrating a doctoral level of thought. Look at me go. The committee member I brought in as a replacement for Richard was actually Lily's advisor, and he had some interesting thoughts on it. And if I was still doing research, I would have loved to have done those projects because they were cool thoughts. The final the final offense or final hurt in this process is that I didn't get to walk. And if you don't know what that means, basically, in the graduation ceremony, the master's and PhD students get to go on the stage, and the PhD students get hooded by their advisor. It's like a little ceremony thing. Like their name's read out, the thesis name is read out, and then you're hooded. Like the special doctoral thing is put on you by your advisor. Ever since I found out this was a thing, I was looking forward to it. My entire time in grad school, someday I'm gonna get that and it's gonna be so cool and it's gonna cost me money, but I'm gonna buy the stupid thing because it means that much to me. This moment of triumph and accomplishment was stolen from me for reasons I'll never understand. Final thoughts on this. First of all, names have been changed to protect the innocent as much as I can. And because I do appreciate all the help they've given me, but don't want them to face consequences for helping me, even though it was 10 years ago almost. But first, fuck you, Richard. You are awful to work for. You made my life hell, unnecessarily so, and pushed me to a point where I almost killed myself. I don't know if that ever reached you. I don't know if it would even matter if it did, if you would care. But just from the bottom of my heart, fuck you. Building on that, awful advisors are not rare in academics, but truly, truly awful ones are, thankfully. If you find yourself feeling a lot of similarities to my process, I am so sorry. Find a new advisor. I don't care how far along you are, there is a way to get out from under the monster you're working for. Maybe it's switching advisors, maybe it's switching programs, maybe it's switching schools. Whatever it is, it's not worth the pain and suffering you're going through. You are not the piece of shit that they are telling you you are. You're not. You made it this far. You probably are demonstrating a doctoral level of thought, and who the fuck are they to tell you what your potential is? If you're in a similar situation, reach out for help. If it's a friendly faculty member, a friend, people in the mental health community nearby, like whatever it is, reach out for help. I know schools have gotten so much better about this in the time since I was a grad student, so take advantage of the resources you can. They're there for you to try to not be in a place like I was. And finally, in that awful day, the worst day and the closest I've come to ending my life, the only thing that kept me from doing it is a promise I made to my husband probably when we were in undergrad, that I would never do anything permanent to myself. I mean, tattoos, whatever, but subtext. And that promise was the only thing that kept me here. And he made me promise him that because he loves me and he doesn't want a world without me. So, dear viewer, my ducklings, if you're relating to just what I felt and are having similar thoughts, I want you to make a similar promise to me that you won't do anything permanent. Because, I don't even know you, but you listened to me for however long this video is. And that takes care and empathy and other qualities that the world is too short on. And we can't afford to lose you. You're a good person. And even though I don't know you, I care about you. The world can be awful and hard and mean and cruel, and I'm sorry for that, but I want you to feel the love and beauty that's there. I don't know you, but just human to human, I do care about you and love you, and I don't want you to hurt yourself in a way that takes your light away from the world. So I want you to promise this random internet stranger that you won't do it. You'll keep fighting. And someday you will win. I kept fighting and finally I won. I got my PhD. Richard didn't win. I may not be on their alumni page, but whatever, that's fine. I won. I got my PhD. I've been able to do things with it. I'm still doing things with it. I won. Richard didn't win. Don't let the assholes get you down. Keep fighting. And hopefully someday you too will win and get past it and be able to feel the love and beauty that's in the world. So finally, I want to sort of thank and name drop and encourage you to check out Ollie, All in Philosophy Tube. He has a painfully beautiful video on a kind of similar topic, but from a philosophy and ethics point of view. I'll hopefully put a card somewhere for that. And it kind of gave me the balls to do this finally, because it is because I've been wanting to air my grievances sort of publicly and share my story, because I think so many in academia, in grad school, are suffering in similar situations and we don't talk about it. It's not part of the conversation, and that's awful, and it should be. So yeah, that was this video. I promise I won't cry often. And anyways, I do love you, my little ducklings. See you in the next video.